His fingers traced the scars on my wrist, the chains that had bound me for weeks now, lying discarded at our feet. The Alpha King, the monster who had locked me in this frozen fortress, was looking at me with eyes that no longer held ice, but something far more dangerous, something that made my Omega instincts sing with a need I didn't understand. When his lips crashed against mine in the throne room, surrounded by the shocked gasps of his entire court, I knew everything had changed. The prisoner had become something else entirely, and the king who swore he'd never feel again was breaking right before my eyes. But how did we get here? How did a simple Omega girl from the border villages end up melting the heart of the most feared ruler in all the kingdoms? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The night they took me, frost covered everything like a funeral shroud. I was collecting herbs near the border forest, my basket half full of wintergreen and silver vine, when I heard the howls. Not the familiar sounds of our village pack, but something darker, more primal, the royal guard. I dropped my basket and ran, my worn boots slipping on ice-covered roots, my breath coming in panicked gasps that turned to white clouds in the frigid air. I didn't make it far. Strong hands grabbed me from behind, lifting me off my feet as I screamed and kicked. The soldier who caught me was massive, his eyes glowing amber in the darkness, his grip iron strong around my waist. They bound my wrists with silver chains that burned my skin, the metal searing against my flesh as I struggled. There were 5 of them, all bearing the crest of the Northern Crown, all following orders that came from the castle I'd only ever seen from a distance, that dark fortress perched on the mountainside like a predator watching the valley below. I begged them to let me go. I told them I was nobody, just an Omega herb gatherer with no family, no pack ties that mattered, nothing worth taking. They didn't care. One of them, a beta with a scar across his jaw, told me the Alpha King was collecting prisoners from all the border villages, anyone who might have information about the rebellion brewing in the south. I knew nothing about any rebellion. I barely knew anything beyond my small world of herbs and healing, of quiet days spent alone because no pack wanted an Omega with no useful connections. The journey to the castle took 3 days. They transported me in an iron cage on wheels, exposed to the elements, the winter wind cutting through my thin dress like knives. I shivered so violently that my teeth chattered constantly, the sound mixing with the creak of wheels and the steady march of boots on frozen ground. We passed through villages that were eerily silent, their windows dark, their streets empty. Fear hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew what the Alpha King had become after the curse took hold. Once, they said, Darius Wolfe had been a fair ruler, strong but just, a king who protected his people and honored the old ways. But 5 years ago, something changed. A witch had cursed him, some said, after he refused her daughter's hand in marriage. Others whispered it was the gods themselves punishing him for pride. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The Alpha King's heart had frozen, his capacity for mercy disappeared like snow in fire, and his reign became one of ice and fear. When we finally reached the castle, I understood why people spoke of it in hushed, frightened tones. The fortress rose from the mountainside like something alive, all black stone and sharp towers, icicles hanging from every surface like fangs. Snow fell constantly here, thick and heavy, covering everything in white. The gates opened with a groan that sounded almost like a scream, and they dragged me inside, through courtyard after courtyard, each colder than the last. Servants scurried past without meeting my eyes, their faces pale and drawn, their movements quick and nervous. Everyone was afraid here. Terror was a physical presence in the air, as real as the cold. They threw me into a cell deep in the lower levels, a small stone room with no windows and only a heavy wooden door with a small barred opening at the top. The floor was covered in old straw that smelled of mildew and despair. There was a thin blanket in one corner and a bucket in the other. Nothing else. The door slammed shut, and I was alone in the darkness, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the distant howl of wind through stone corridors. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and tried not to cry. Crying wouldn't help. Nothing would help. I was in the Alpha King's dungeon, and people who came here rarely left. The first week passed in a blur of cold and hunger. They brought me food once a day, a bowl of thin gruel and a piece of stale bread, passed through the door, opening by hands I never saw. I tried to keep track of time by counting meals, but sometimes I slept through them, exhausted by the cold and the fear that sat like a stone in my chest. My omega nature made it worse. Without a pack, without the comforting presence of others, I felt adrift and anxious, my instincts screaming that I was unsafe, unprotected, vulnerable. I spent hours curled in the corner, the blanket wrapped tight around me, trying to conserve warmth and sanity in equal measure. On the 8th day, they came for me. 2 guards unlocked the door and hauled me to my feet. Not roughly, but not gently either, their faces expressionless as they led me through corridors I couldn't map, up staircases that seemed to go on forever, through halls lined with portraits of past kings and queens, whose painted eyes seemed to follow my stumbling progress. My legs were weak from days of sitting, and I nearly fell twice, earning impatient growls from my escorts. Finally, we reached a massive set of double doors, carved with wolves and winter roses. One guard knocked, a sound that echoed like thunder, and a voice from inside said simply, "Come in." They pushed me through the doors into the throne room, and despite everything, despite my fear and exhaustion and desperation, I gasped. The room was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows far above, its walls covered in tapestries depicting battles and hunts and ceremonies from ages past. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting flickering light that made shadows dance like living things. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform, sat a throne made of black wood and white stone, and on that throne sat the Alpha King himself, Darius Wolfe. Even seated, he was clearly massive, broad-shouldered and powerful, his presence filling the room like a physical force. He wore black from head to toe, his clothing simple but clearly expensive, his dark hair slightly long, touching his collar. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They were ice blue, so pale they were almost white, and they held absolutely no warmth, no mercy, no humanity. They swept over me with the interest someone might give a mildly curious insect, assessing and dismissing in the same glance. His face was beautiful in a harsh, angular way, all strong bones and sharp lines, a face carved by a sculptor with no interest in softness. He looked to be maybe 30 years old, though with Alphas it was sometimes hard to tell. What I could tell was that this man was dangerous in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. "Kneel," one of the guards said, pushing down on my shoulder. I dropped to my knees on the cold stone floor, my chains clinking softly, my head automatically bowing in submission. It was instinct, the omega in me responding to the overwhelming alpha power radiating from the throne. I could feel it pressing against my skin like winter wind, demanding obedience, respect, fear. "Name," the Alpha King said. His voice was deep and cold, each word precise and clipped, with no trace of warmth or curiosity. He was asking because protocol demanded it, not because he cared. "Mira Ashbourne," I whispered, my voice hoarse from disuse. My throat was dry, my words barely audible in the vast room. "Speak up. I cannot hear mumbling." His tone didn't change, still flat and emotionless, but somehow the command in it made me flinch. "Mira Ashbourne," I repeated, louder this time. "I'm from Millbrook Village. I don't know anything about any rebellion. I was just gathering herbs when your soldiers took me. Please, I haven't done anything wrong." Silence fell. I kept my eyes on the floor, on my own trembling hands clasped in my lap, not daring to look up. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and cold, studying me with that same detached interest. "Millbrook," he said finally. "That village reported unusual activity 6 weeks ago. Strangers passing through, asking questions about the northern defenses. You saw nothing?" I shook my head quickly. "I keep to myself. I don't talk to strangers. I just gather herbs and sell them at the market. That's all. You have no pack affiliation." His words were a statement, not a question, but I answered anyway. "No, Your Majesty. My parents died when I was young. No one wanted to take in an omega with no useful skills or connections. I've been on my own since I was 15. For the first time, something flickered in those ice-blue eyes. Not sympathy, nothing so human, but perhaps a faint curiosity. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the arms of his throne, his fingers steepled under his chin. An Omega alone for that long should be feral by now. Unstable. Yet you seem relatively sane. How? The question was clinical, like a scholar inquiring about an interesting specimen. I don't know, I admitted. I just kept busy, learned about herbs and healing, stayed away from pack politics, survived. The truth was I didn't know why I hadn't lost my mind. Most Omegas needed pack bonds, needed the structure and support and connection. Without it, they deteriorated, became anxious and erratic, and eventually dangerous to themselves and others. Somehow, I'd managed to avoid that fate, building a small, solitary life that kept me sane, if not happy. The Alpha King studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he made a gesture with one hand, a casual flick of his fingers. "Take her to the East Tower," he said to the guards. "Third floor, the room with the window. Give her proper clothing and adequate food. She is no longer a prisoner in the dungeons. She will remain in the castle under observation until I determine what use she might serve." I looked up sharply, surprise overcoming my fear for a moment. The East Tower? That was where guests stayed, where minor nobles visiting the castle were housed. It wasn't freedom, but it was far better than the cell I'd been rotting in. "Your Majesty," I started, not sure what I was going to say. "Thank you or why, or please let me go," but he cut me off with a sharp look. "Do not mistake this for kindness, Omega. You are still my prisoner. You will still be questioned. But I have use for someone with healing knowledge, and I cannot have you dying of cold before I determine what that use is. Now go. I have no more time to waste on you today." He waved his hand dismissively, already looking away, his attention moving to papers on a small table beside his throne. The guards pulled me to my feet and led me back out of the throne room. As the doors closed behind me, I realized my hands were shaking, not just from cold but from the sheer intensity of being in that man's presence. The Alpha King was exactly what the rumors said, cold and merciless and utterly terrifying. But there had been that moment, that brief flicker of curiosity in his eyes, and I found myself wondering what it meant, wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, there was something human still buried beneath all that ice. The room they gave me in the East Tower was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in warm furs, a table and chair by the window, and a wash basin in the corner. Compared to the dungeon cell, it was a palace. A servant came shortly after I arrived, a young beta woman with frightened eyes, bringing fresh clothing, a tray of real food, bread and cheese, and hot soup that made my empty stomach cramp with hunger, and a bucket of warm water for washing. She didn't speak except to tell me her name was Elena, and she hurried out as soon as she'd set everything down, as if afraid to linger in my presence. I supposed being associated with a prisoner, even one moved to better quarters, was dangerous in this place where fear ruled. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, then washed the grime and despair of the dungeon from my skin and hair. The clothes were simple but well made, a soft wool dress in deep green, undergarments that actually fit, thick stockings, and sturdy boots. When I was clean and dressed and warm for the first time in over a week, I sat by the window and looked out at the courtyard far below. Snow was falling again, thick flakes that swirled in the wind, covering everything in fresh white. The castle was beautiful in its way, all Gothic spires and ancient stonework, but it felt dead, empty of joy or life or warmth, a frozen fortress for a frozen king. I spent the next few days in that tower room, brought meals 3 times a day by Elena, who never stayed long enough for conversation. No one came to question me. No one explained what the Alpha King meant by having use for my healing knowledge. I was simply left alone with my thoughts and the endless snow outside my window. At night, I could hear wolves howling in the mountains, wild and free, and I pressed my face to the cold glass and wondered if I would ever be free again. On the 5th day, Elena arrived with my breakfast and a message. "The Alpha King requires your presence in the healing wing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am to take you there after you eat." She set the tray down and stood by the door, waiting, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "The healing wing?" I repeated, confused. "What for?" She shook her head quickly. "I don't know. I don't ask questions. Please eat quickly. We mustn't keep him waiting." I forced down food my nervous stomach didn't want, then followed Elena through the castle's labyrinth of corridors. We descended several floors, passed through sections I hadn't seen before, and finally entered a wing that smelled of herbs and antiseptic. Familiar scents that made something in my chest unclench slightly. The healing wing was a long hallway, lined with rooms on both sides. Most of their doors open to reveal beds occupied by injured or sick patients. Servants moved between rooms, carrying bandages and medicines, their expressions harried and exhausted. Elena led me to a large room at the end of the hall where the Alpha King stood with his back to us, looking down at something I couldn't see. When he heard us enter, he turned, those cold blue eyes fixing on me with that same unsettling intensity. "Mira Ashbourne," he said, gesturing me forward. "Come here. I have something to show you." His tone was still emotionless, but there was an edge to it now, something sharp beneath the ice. I approached slowly, my heart hammering, and saw what he'd been looking at. On a bed lay a young man, maybe 17 or 18, his face pale and sweating, his breathing labored. His right leg was bandaged, but blood was seeping through the wrappings, dark and wet. "This is Marcus, one of my personal guards," the Alpha King said. "He was injured in training 3 days ago. A blade cut deep into his thigh. My healers have done what they can, but the wound is infected and he grows worse by the hour. They say he will likely die by tomorrow." He stated this all in the same flat tone, as if describing the weather rather than a young man's impending death. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, looking at the boy's suffering face. "That's terrible. Can you save him?" The question was direct, his eyes boring into mine. I don't know," I stammered. "I would need to see the wound, clean it properly. I might have some knowledge that could help, but I'm not a trained healer. I just know herbs and basic treatment." "Then you will try." It was a command, not a request. "If he lives, I will know your healing knowledge has value. If he dies," his words trailed off, but the implication was clear. If the boy died, I would have proven myself useless. And useless prisoners did not stay in comfortable tower rooms. I swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll need supplies, clean water, fresh bandages, and if you have them, golden seal root, honey, garlic, and calendula. I'll also need privacy to work." The Alpha King gave orders to the servants hovering nearby, who scattered to gather what I'd requested. He himself made no move to leave, instead pulling up a chair and sitting down, his gaze never leaving me. "You're staying?" I asked, surprised. I wished to observe. His tone suggested this was not up for debate. I turned my attention to Marcus, pushing aside my nervousness at having the most terrifying alpha in the kingdoms, watching my every move. The boy's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. I placed my hand on his forehead and found it burning with fever. Not good. Infection had taken deep hold. When the supplies arrived, I got to work. First, I carefully removed the bloody bandages, revealing a wound that made me wince. The cut was deep, running from mid-thigh almost to the knee, and the flesh around it was red and swollen, with yellowish pus oozing from several points. The healers had stitched it closed, but they'd done so while the wound was still dirty, sealing the infection inside. A common mistake, but a deadly one. "I'm going to have to reopen it," I said, looking up at the Alpha King. "The infection is trapped inside. If I don't clean it out, the stitches are useless." He nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin. Do what must be done. I worked for the next 2 hours, carefully cutting the stitches and opening the wound, cleaning out infected tissue with a gentleness born of practice, flushing everything with water boiled with golden seal root, a powerful natural antiseptic. Marcus whimpered and thrashed, but servants held him still while I worked. I packed the clean wound with a paste made from honey, crushed garlic, and calendula, all natural infection fighters, then wrapped it loosely in clean bandages, leaving room for drainage. Finally, I made him drink a tea of willow bark for the fever and pain. Through it all, the Alpha King watched in silence, his expression unreadable, his presence a constant weight on my awareness. When I finally finished and stepped back, washing my hands in clean water, I was exhausted. My dress stained with blood despite the apron I'd been given. "Will he live?" the Alpha King asked. "I think so," I said carefully. "If the infection doesn't spread further, if his fever breaks in the next day or two, he should recover. But I can't promise anything. Sometimes the body is too weak, or the infection too strong." "You will stay with him," the Alpha King said, standing from his chair. "You will monitor his condition and report any changes to me directly. If he begins to improve, I will expect you to apply your knowledge to others in this wing who are not responding to traditional treatment." He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. His eyes, for just a moment, held something other than cold indifference. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps the faintest shadow of respect. "You did well, Mira Ashbourne. Your hands are steady and your knowledge seems sound. Perhaps you will prove useful after all." Then he was gone, leaving me standing there with blood on my hands and hope flickering in my chest for the first time since my capture. If I could make myself valuable to him, if I could prove my worth as a healer, maybe I could earn better treatment. Maybe I could even, eventually, earn my freedom. Marcus's fever broke on the second day, and by the end of the week, he was sitting up and eating solid food, the wound healing cleanly with no sign of further infection. Word spread through the castle quickly. The Omega prisoner had saved one of the Alpha King's personal guards when the trained healers could not. Suddenly, I was in demand. The head healer, an elderly man named Gareth, came to me with case after case. Soldiers with wounds that wouldn't heal, servants with mysterious ailments, even a visiting noble's daughter with a persistent cough. I treated them all using the knowledge I'd accumulated through years of solitary study and practice, and more often than not, I succeeded where others had failed. The Alpha King summoned me regularly to report on my progress. These audiences were always brief and businesslike, conducted in a small study off the throne room, rather than in that vast, intimidating space. He would listen to my reports with that same cold attention, ask pointed questions about treatments and outcomes, and dismiss me when he was satisfied. He never thanked me. He never showed any emotion at all beyond that faint clinical interest. But he also ensured I had everything I needed, that servants brought me any herb or supply I requested, that I was given more comfortable quarters on the second floor of the East Tower with a larger workspace for preparing medicines. Winter deepened. Snow piled higher against the castle walls. I fell into a routine of work that kept me busy from dawn until late evening, tending to the sick and injured, preparing medicines and salves, teaching Gareth's assistants better techniques for wound care and fever management. The work gave me purpose, kept my mind occupied, kept the loneliness at bay. I didn't think about escape anymore. Where would I go? The castle was surrounded by mountains and winter storms. Even if I could get past the guards and the walls, I would freeze to death within hours. No, my prison was comfortable enough, and at least here I was useful. 3 months after my capture, something changed. The Alpha King summoned me to his study late one evening, after most of the castle had gone to bed. I found him standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains, a glass of dark liquid in his hand. He didn't turn when I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence for a long moment. "Your Majesty," I said softly, when the silence stretched too long. He turned then, and I was startled to see something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not warmth, but weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that made him look older than his years. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "We need to talk." I sat, confused and nervous. He crossed the room and took the chair opposite mine, close enough that I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. Close enough that his scent reached me, pine and winter air and something darker. Something that made my Omega instincts stir uncomfortably. "You have been here for 3 months," he said, without preamble. "In that time, you have saved 12 lives and improved the health and recovery rates in the healing wing by 30%. Gareth tells me you are the most naturally talented healer he has worked with in 40 years. He paused, taking a sip of his drink. I have decided to make you the official head healer of the castle. You will report directly to me. Your quarters will be moved to the wing reserved for high-ranking staff. You will have a staff of 6 assistants and access to whatever resources you require. I stared at him, speechless. This was far beyond anything I could have imagined. Head healer? That was a position of real power. Real status. It was also a position that would tie me to this castle permanently. I don't understand, I said finally. I'm your prisoner. Why would you give me such responsibility? Because I need competence more than I need to maintain the fiction that you are still a prisoner, he said bluntly. You are wasted in a healer's assistant role. You have skills this castle desperately needs. It would be foolish not to utilize them fully. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. Of course, you will still not be permitted to leave the castle grounds. You will still be under guard at all times. But within these walls, you will have authority over all matters related to healing and health. What if I refuse? The question slipped out before I could stop it. His expression didn't change. You won't. You're not stupid enough to choose a dungeon cell over the opportunity to practice your skills and help people. That's not who you are, Mira Ashbourne. I've watched you for 3 months. I know what drives you. It's not ambition or power. It's the simple need to be useful, to matter. I'm offering you the chance to matter more than you ever have before. He was right, damn him. I couldn't refuse, not because of the threat of punishment, but because the work called to me. The chance to build a real healing program, to train others, to save more lives. It was everything I'd ever wanted without knowing I wanted it. I accept, I said quietly. Thank you, Your Majesty. He nodded, a sharp, satisfied motion. Good. You will move to your new quarters tomorrow. I will expect weekly reports on the status of all patients and monthly summaries of improvements made to healing protocols. He stood, indicating the meeting was over, and I rose as well, preparing to leave. But as I reached the door, his voice stopped me. Mira. I turned back, surprised. He had never used just my name before, always the full formal version. He was standing by the window again, his back to me, that glass still in his hand. You asked me once, indirectly, why I became what I am. Why the frozen king? Why the cruelty and the fear? His voice was softer now, almost thoughtful. Would you like to know the truth? I hesitated, then said, Only if you want to tell me, Your Majesty. 5 years ago, he said slowly, I was betrayed by someone I trusted absolutely, someone I loved. The pain of that betrayal was so intense, so all-consuming, that I prayed to the old gods to take it away. They answered. But gods are literal creatures. They took away the pain by taking away my ability to feel anything at all. No more hurt, but also no more joy. No more grief, but also no more love. They froze my heart, literally and completely, as punishment for trying to escape the consequences of caring. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were emptier than I'd ever seen them. I cannot feel, Mira. Not happiness, not sadness, not anger, not affection. I exist in a state of absolute emotional void. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understood. And the horror of it made my chest tighten. To live without feeling anything, to exist in a gray world where nothing mattered, nothing touched you, that was a fate worse than death. I'm sorry, I whispered. That's terrible. Don't be sorry, he said, his tone hardening back to its usual cold precision. It makes me an effective ruler. I make decisions based purely on logic and necessity, unclouded by sentiment or weakness. The kingdom has never been more stable, more prosperous, more secure. My frozen heart is a gift, not a curse. But the way he said it, the way he turned away immediately after, made me wonder if he really believed that. Made me wonder if somewhere, buried deep beneath the ice, a part of him remembered what it was to feel and mourned the loss. I left him there, staring out at the endless snow, and as I walked back to my tower room for the last night I would spend there, I found tears on my cheeks, not for myself, but for him, for the Alpha King who had everything except the one thing that made life worth living. My new quarters were beautiful, a suite of 3 rooms on the main floor of the castle near the healing wing, a large bedroom with a 4-poster bed and a fireplace, a sitting room with comfortable furniture and bookshelves, and a workroom filled with cabinets and tables and everything I needed for preparing medicines. I also had 2 servants assigned to me, including Elena, who seemed relieved to have a mistress who wasn't terrifying. Within a week, I had established my authority in the healing wing, reorganized the storage systems, implemented new cleanliness protocols, and begun an intensive training program for my assistants. The work consumed me, filled my days from early morning until late at night, and I was grateful for it. When I was working, I didn't have time to think about the fact that I was still a prisoner, still trapped in this frozen castle, still at the mercy of a king who couldn't feel. But late at night, alone in my comfortable bed, I thought about him, about the way he had looked standing by that window, so alone despite all his power, about the flatness in his eyes when he described his cursed existence, about the careful way he controlled every aspect of his life, as if afraid that any deviation might cause the ice to crack. I shouldn't care about him. He was my captor, the reason I couldn't go home, the source of the fear that permeated every stone of this castle. But I found myself wanting to help him anyway, wanting to find some way to thaw that frozen heart, even though I knew it was impossible, even though I knew I was a fool for caring. Winter gave way to early spring, though you could barely tell inside the castle walls where snow fell year-round. I had been at Winterhold, as the fortress was called, for 5 months. My position as head healer was firmly established, my authority unquestioned, my successes mounting. The Alpha King summoned me weekly for reports, our meetings falling into a comfortable pattern. He would ask questions, I would answer, he would give orders or approve requests. It was all very professional, very distant, but sometimes, just sometimes, I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something that might have been curiosity or might have been nothing at all. Then came the day that changed everything. I was in the workroom preparing a batch of fever-reducing tonic when Elena burst in, her face pale with panic. "Mira, you have to come quickly. It's the Alpha King. He's been injured." My heart stopped. What? How? Training accident in the courtyard. He insisted on sparring with his best swordsman and took a blade across the ribs. He's bleeding badly and refusing to let anyone treat him except, she swallowed hard, except you. He asked for you specifically. I grabbed my healer's bag and ran. Elena led me through corridors at a sprint, down to the courtyard where a crowd had gathered. They parted as I approached, revealing the Alpha King sitting on the ground, his back against a stone wall, one hand pressed to his side where blood was seeping between his fingers. His face was pale but composed, those ice-blue eyes tracking my approach with their usual cold precision. "Your Majesty," I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands already reaching for the wound. "Let me see." He moved his hand away, revealing a long, deep cut that ran from just below his ribs across his abdomen. It was bleeding freely, soaking his torn shirt, pooling on the stones beneath him. "I need to get you inside," I said urgently, "to the healing wing where I have proper supplies." "No time," he said calmly, as if discussing dinner plans rather than a potentially fatal injury. "Treat it here. That's an order." I wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes told me it would be useless. I turned to Elena. "Bring my full kit from the workroom. Clean water, needles and thread, bandages, everything. Run." She ran. I turned back to the Alpha King and began carefully peeling away the ruined shirt. The wound was worse than I'd thought, deep enough that I could see muscle, long enough that it would take dozens of stitches to close. But the blade had missed anything vital, which was the only good news in this situation. "This is going to hurt," I told him. "Even for an alpha, stitching without pain medication is not pleasant." "I'm aware," he said flatly. "Do what you must. I no longer feel pain the way others do. It's simply information, not suffering." I looked at him sharply. "The curse took that too?" He nodded once. "Physical sensation is muted. I feel pressure and temperature, but pain registers as a distant signal, easily ignored. It makes injury interesting rather than distressing." The clinical way he described something that should be horrifying made my chest ache, but I pushed the feeling aside and focused on the work. When Elena arrived with supplies, I cleaned the wound thoroughly, ignoring the crowd of soldiers and servants watching from a respectful distance. Then I threaded my finest needle and began to stitch, working from the inside out, layer by careful layer, the way I'd learned from old textbooks and careful practice. Through it all, the Alpha King sat motionless as a statue, watching my hands work, his expression never changing. He didn't flinch, didn't tense, showed no sign of discomfort. It was eerie, wrong, this complete absence of reaction to what should be agonizing. I found myself talking as I worked, partly to fill the silence, partly because I needed to hear something human in this moment. "You need to be more careful," I said softly. "You're the king. You can't afford to take risks in training. What if the blade had been 2 inches to the left? What if it had struck something vital? Then I would have died," he said simply. "It would not have been a tragedy. My heir is competent." The kingdom would continue. "Don't say that," I snapped, surprising myself with the sharp emotion in my voice. "Your life has value beyond your usefulness to the kingdom. Does it?" He tilted his head, studying me with that unnerving intensity. "Why would you think so? You, of all people, should wish me dead. I took your freedom. I made you a prisoner. Yet here you are, stitching me back together as if my life matters to you." I paused in my work, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in months. "It does matter to me," I said quietly. "I don't know why, but it does. Maybe because I've seen enough death to hate seeing any more. Maybe because despite everything, I think there's still something human in you, buried under all that ice. Or maybe I'm just a fool who can't help caring about broken things." I went back to my stitching. "Take your pick." Silence fell between us, but it felt different than the usual cold distance. Something had shifted, some barrier had thinned, and I could feel it in the air like the pressure change before a storm. When I finished the last stitch and tied it off, then wrapped clean bandages around his torso, my hands were shaking slightly. Not from exertion, but from the strange intimacy of the moment, of touching him, tending to him, caring for him in a way that felt far more personal than any healing work should. "There," I said, sitting back on my heels. "You need to rest for at least 3 days. No training, no strenuous activity. Change the bandages twice daily and have someone check for signs of infection. If you develop a fever, send for me immediately." He looked down at my work, then back at me. "You have gentle hands," he said. And there was something in his voice I'd never heard before, something almost wondering. When you touch, it feels like warmth. I had forgotten what warmth felt like. Before I could respond, before I could process what he'd just said and the strange way it made my heart flutter, he was standing, waving away the hands that reached to help him. The crowd dispersed quickly under his cold stare, leaving just me, Elena, and a few guards. The Alpha King looked at me one more time, an expression on his face I couldn't begin to interpret, then turned and walked toward the castle entrance, his steps steady despite the injury. "That was weird," Elena whispered beside me. "I've never heard him say anything like that. About warmth, about touch. It was almost like he was feeling something." I gathered my supplies with hands that wouldn't quite steady. "He doesn't feel," I reminded her, reminded myself. "It's the curse." He was just making an observation, but as we walked back to the healing wing, I couldn't shake the memory of how he'd looked at me, how his voice had softened for just a moment. It meant nothing, I told myself firmly. It was shock from blood loss, nothing more. The Alpha King's heart was frozen solid, and no amount of gentle touching or careful stitching would change that. Over the next 3 days, I visited the Alpha King's chambers twice daily to check his wound and change his bandages. These visits were torture in their own way. His rooms were in the highest tower of the castle, a suite that was both austere and luxurious, all dark wood and stone and furs. He would sit bare-chested while I worked, and I tried desperately not to notice the sculpted planes of his body. The scars that marked his skin telling stories of battles and dangers survived. I tried not to notice how his eyes followed my every movement, studying me with an intensity that made me nervous and warm at the same time. The wound was healing perfectly, no signs of infection, the stitches holding strong. On the 3rd day, as I finished wrapping fresh bandages around his torso, he caught my wrist gently. his fingers warm against my pulse point. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "Tell me the truth, Mira. Why does my life matter to you when I have given you nothing but captivity?" I could have pulled away, I should have. But something in his touch, gentle despite the strength in those fingers, made me stay. "Because everyone deserves to be cared for," I said softly. "Even kings with frozen hearts. Even captors who don't know how to be anything but cold. You're still a person, Darius. The curse didn't change that." He flinched when I used his name. Actually flinched. The first truly uncontrolled reaction I'd ever seen from him. "No one calls me that," he said, his voice rough. "Not for 5 years. Maybe someone should," I whispered. "Maybe you need to remember you have a name, not just a title." His grip on my wrist tightened, not painfully but firmly, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. I could see something moving behind his eyes, something struggling against the ice, trying to break free. Then he released me abruptly and stood, turning away toward the window. "You may go," he said, his voice back to its usual cold precision. "I will send for you if I need further treatment." I left quickly, my heart pounding, my wrist still tingling where he'd touched me. Something was happening between us, something dangerous and impossible. I couldn't let myself feel anything for him beyond the professional concern of a healer for a patient. He was my captor. He couldn't feel anything in return. Any emotions I developed would be one-sided and foolish and doomed to bring nothing but pain. But telling myself that didn't stop the dreams that came at night. Dreams where his ice-blue eyes held warmth, where his touch was tender rather than just gentle, where his frozen heart somehow learned to beat again. Spring fully arrived, and with it came visitors to the castle, lords and ladies from the surrounding territories, here for the seasonal court and to pay their respects to the Alpha King. The castle filled with people and noise and life in a way I hadn't seen before. Banquets were held in the great hall, music echoed through corridors, servants rushed everywhere preparing for one event after another. As head healer, I was expected to attend some of these functions, to be visible as part of the Alpha King's senior staff. The first banquet I attended was overwhelming. The great hall was transformed with candles and flowers, long tables laden with food, nobles dressed in their finest clothing, laughing and talking and dancing. I wore a dress Elena had found for me, deep blue silk that was far finer than anything I'd owned before, and stood awkwardly near the wall, feeling completely out of place. I was watching the dancers swirl across the floor when a voice beside me said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." I turned to find a young lord smiling at me, handsome in a conventional way, his eyes friendly. "I'm not very comfortable at these things," I admitted. "I'm more used to healing wings than great halls." He laughed. "I'm Lord Adrian Thornwood. And you must be the famous healer everyone's talking about, the one who saved half the castle and captured the Alpha King's favor." "I wouldn't say captured his favor," I said carefully. "I just do my job well." "Modest too," he said, his smile widening. "I like that. Would you do me the honor of dancing with me, healer? I promise I won't step on your feet more than twice." I was about to politely refuse when I felt it, that familiar cold presence behind me. The Alpha King had appeared without warning, and the temperature in my immediate area seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Lord Thornwood," he said, his voice flat and sharp as a blade. "I was unaware you had been introduced to my head healer." Adrian bowed quickly, his easy confidence evaporating. "Your Majesty, forgive me, I was simply being friendly to a lovely lady standing alone." The Alpha King's eyes, cold and hard, moved from Adrian to me and back again. "Mira Ashbourne is under my personal protection and is not to be bothered by opportunistic nobles seeking to curry favor. I suggest you find someone else to dance with." The dismissal was brutal and humiliating. Adrian's face flushed red, but he bowed again and retreated quickly into the crowd. I stared at the Alpha King, confusion and anger warring in my chest. "That was incredibly rude," I said quietly. "He was just being friendly." "He was looking at you like you were something to be acquired," the Alpha King said coldly. "I do not appreciate my senior staff being treated as potential conquests. I'm perfectly capable of handling friendly conversation without your intervention, Your Majesty." I kept my voice low, but couldn't quite hide the bite in it. His jaw tightened. The only sign of any emotion "You are dismissed for the evening, Mira. Go back to your quarters." I wanted to argue, wanted to stand my ground. But the look in his eyes told me it would be useless. I turned and left the great hall, my face burning with embarrassment and frustration. Behind me, I could feel his gaze following me all the way to the doors. That night, I paced my sitting room, too angry to sleep. Who did he think he was, chasing away anyone who showed me a moment of kindness? I was his prisoner, yes, but did that mean I couldn't have any social interaction beyond work? Did he expect me to exist in complete isolation except when I was useful to him? The unfairness of it burned in my chest like a hot coal. A knock at my door interrupted my furious thoughts. I opened it to find the Alpha King standing there, and my anger flared hotter. "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. "Come to give me more orders about who I can and can't speak to?" He stepped into my sitting room without invitation, and I backed up instinctively. He closed the door behind him and just stood there for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "My behavior this evening was inappropriate and controlling. You were right to be angry." I blinked, shocked. Had the Alpha King just apologized? Was such a thing even possible? "I don't understand," I said carefully. "Why did you chase him away?" He moved to the window, that familiar gesture, putting distance between us while he gathered his words. "Because when I saw him looking at you, smiling at you, preparing to dance with you, something happened, something I haven't felt in 5 years. He turned to face me, and his eyes held something raw and desperate. For just a moment, just a brief, impossible moment, I felt jealousy. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "But that's not possible," I whispered. "The curse. You can't feel," you said. "I can't," he agreed, his voice tight with frustration. "Or I shouldn't be able to. But lately, when I'm near you, when you touch me, when you speak to me with that gentle concern in your voice, I've been experiencing things. Not full emotions, but echoes of them. Shadows of what feelings used to be." His hands clenched at his sides. "Tonight, seeing another man about to put his hands on you, to hold you while dancing, something in my chest tightened. It hurt, Mira. I felt actual pain, emotional pain. For the first time in 5 years. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? That somehow, impossibly, I was affecting his curse? That my presence, my touch, was beginning to thaw his frozen heart? "I don't understand how that's possible," I said, my voice shaking. "Curses don't just break themselves, especially not ones laid by the old gods." "I don't understand it either," he said, taking a step toward me, "but I know it's happening. Every time you tend to my wounds, every time you argue with me, every time you look at me like I'm more than just a frozen king, I feel a little more. Not much, just tiny fractures in the ice, but it's there. And tonight, for the first time, I realized I don't want anyone else touching you. I don't want anyone else making you smile. I want—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words, "I want you for myself." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me, should have made me angry. Instead, it sent heat coursing through my body, made my omega instincts sing with something that felt dangerously like desire. "You can't have me," I said, but my voice came out breathless rather than firm. "I'm not a possession. And even if your curse is weakening, even if you're starting to feel again, that doesn't give you the right to claim me." He crossed the distance between us in 2 long strides. And suddenly, he was right there, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his scent overwhelmed my senses. "You're right," he said roughly. "I have no right. You owe me nothing. I've been your captor, your jailer, the reason you lost your freedom. But knowing that doesn't change what I want. It doesn't change the fact that you've become the only thing in this frozen wasteland that feels real to me." His hand came up slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away, and cupped my cheek. The gentleness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. "Tell me to leave," he said softly. "Tell me you feel nothing for me, and I will walk out that door and never speak of this again. I will release you from your position if you wish, give you quarters on the other side of the castle, ensure you never have to see me except from a distance. Just tell me, and I will respect your wishes. I should tell him to leave. I should protect myself from the inevitable pain of caring for someone who might never fully feel again. Someone who held all the power in our relationship. Someone who was still, technically, my captor. But as I looked into those ice-blue eyes and saw the desperate hope struggling against lifetimes of coldness, I couldn't do it. The truth was I had been falling for him for months, since the night he'd revealed the truth about his curse, maybe even before that. I'd tried to fight it, tried to convince myself it was just sympathy or gratitude or some twisted form of captivity psychology. But it was more than that. It was real and deep and terrifying in its intensity. I can't tell you I feel nothing, I whispered, because it would be a lie. Something blazed in his eyes, that shadow of emotion becoming almost real, almost solid. Then his mouth was on mine, and I was kissing him back, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer even as part of me screamed that this was dangerous, this was stupid, this was going to end in heartbreak, but I didn't care. For the first time in my captivity, I felt alive, wanted, cherished. His kiss was unpracticed but intense, like he was trying to communicate through touch what he couldn't fully express with words. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I don't know what we're doing, he said roughly. I don't know if I can ever fully feel again. I don't know if the curse will break, or if this is all there will ever be. These small fractures and echoes. But I know I want to try, with you. If you're willing to take that risk. I'm willing, I said, and meant it despite the fear curling in my stomach. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll start trying to break the curse properly. Talk to scholars, seek out witches who might know how to undo what was done. Don't just accept these small changes. Fight for more. He pulled back to look at me, and a smile, small and rusty but genuine, touched his lips. I promise, he said. For you, Mira Ashbourne, I will fight against the very gods themselves if necessary. That night marked the beginning of everything changing. The Alpha King, Darius, as I now sometimes called him in private, was true to his word. He sent messengers to every corner of the kingdom, seeking information about curse breaking. He brought in scholars to research the old gods and their magic. He even, after much searching, located a witch willing to visit the castle, an ancient woman named Marjorie, who smelled of herbs and earth, and examined him with knowing eyes. The curse is complex, she told us, her voice crackling like dry leaves. It was laid with your own consent, King. You asked the gods to take away your pain, and they did, more thoroughly than you could have imagined. Breaking it will require you to choose pain again, to actively embrace feeling even when it hurts. And it will hurt, make no mistake. When emotions return fully, they will not come gently. You will experience every feeling you've been denied all at once. 5 years of grief and joy and anger and love hitting you like a tidal wave. Most could not survive that onslaught with their sanity intact. I can survive it, Darius said firmly, his hand finding mine and squeezing. If it means truly living again, I can survive anything. Marjorie smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. Perhaps you can with the right anchor. She looked at me meaningfully. The Omega, she has been acting as a crack in the ice, weakening the curse's hold through constant exposure. The gods could not have predicted that someone would care for you despite your coldness, that their affection would be genuine and undemanding. Such love is rare and powerful. Continue to let her in. Continue to feel what little you can, and eventually the ice will shatter completely. But be warned. When it does, the backlash will be violent and dangerous. You will need strong control and a stronger support system to weather it. After she left, Darius and I sat in his study in silence for a long time. 5 years of emotions all at once, he said finally. That does sound rather unpleasant. Rather unpleasant is an understatement, I said, squeezing his hand. But I'll be here, through all of it. I'll help you handle whatever comes. He pulled me into his arms, holding me close, his chin resting on top of my head. You shouldn't have to, he murmured. You've already done so much, saved my people, saved me, given me hope when I thought I'd never feel anything again. It's too much to ask that you also endure the chaos of my emotional awakening. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. pulling back to look up at him. We're in this together now, Darius, for better or worse. The weeks that followed were strange and beautiful and occasionally frustrating. Darius's emotions continued to surface in small bursts, unpredictable and intense. He would laugh at something I said, a genuine sound of amusement that made everyone nearby freeze in shock. He would get frustrated when something went wrong, actual visible irritation rather than cold dismissal. Once, he even cried, silent tears sliding down his cheeks as he read a letter from a soldier's widow, and he looked at those tears with wonder and horror in equal measure. Through it all, I stayed by his side. We kept our growing relationship quiet, not quite secret, but not announced either. I still held my position as head healer, still worked long hours tending to the castle's sick and injured. But my evenings were spent with Darius, talking and reading and slowly learning to navigate this new dynamic between us. He was careful with me, always asking permission before touching, always making sure I wanted what he wanted. The contrast between his former coldness and this new considerate attention was stark and deeply affecting. The court noticed the changes in their king. Some were pleased, hoping for a return to the fair and just ruler he'd been before the curse. Others were nervous, uncertain what a king with emotions might do. The visiting nobles departed, spreading rumors throughout the kingdom that the frozen king was thawing, that something miraculous was happening in Winterhold Castle. Summer came, and for the first time in 5 years, the eternal snow around the castle began to melt. Not completely, not everywhere, but enough that green grass appeared in patches of the courtyards, enough that flowers started to bloom in protected corners. The servants whispered that it was a sign, that the curse was truly breaking. Darius and I knew better. The curse was weakening, but not broken. The real test was still to come. It came on a night in late summer, 6 months after that first kiss in my sitting room. Darius had been feeling more throughout the day, commenting on how overwhelming it was becoming, how the emotions were no longer small echoes, but building waves. We were in his chambers after dinner when it happened. He was standing by the window, as usual, looking out at the mountains, and I was reading by the fire. Suddenly, he gasped and doubled over, his hands clutching the windowsill so hard I heard the wood crack. I was at his side instantly, my hands on his shoulders. "Darius, what's wrong?" "It's happening," he ground out through clenched teeth. "All of it, everything." "Oh gods, Mira, it's too much. I can't hold it all." And then he collapsed, and I barely caught him, lowering us both to the floor. His body was rigid, shaking, his eyes wide and unfocused. I could see emotions flickering across his face like lightning, too fast to name, grief and joy and rage and fear and love all tangled together in a chaotic storm. This was what Marjorie had warned us about, the violent return of 5 years' worth of feelings. But knowing it was coming hadn't prepared me for how terrifying it was to witness. I held him as tightly as I could, wrapping my arms around him, pressing my face against his neck. "I'm here," I said urgently. "I've got you. You're not alone. Focus on my voice. Darius, focus on my touch. Let it anchor you. You're safe. You're going to be okay." For hours, he shook and trembled in my arms, occasionally crying out or sobbing or laughing hysterically. I held him through all of it, ignoring my cramping muscles and aching back, just being his anchor like Marjorie had said. Slowly, gradually, the storm began to subside. His shaking eased, his breathing steadied, his eyes cleared and focused on my face. "Mira," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "I can feel everything, everything. The grief for the years I lost, the anger at the witch who cursed me, the joy of having you here, the love, gods, the love I feel for you is so strong it hurts. How do people live like this? How do they function with all these feelings?" "You learn to manage them," I said softly, stroking his hair back from his sweat-dampened forehead. "It takes practice, but you will learn, and you don't have to do it alone. I'll help you. I'll always help you." He pulled me down and kissed me, and it was different from every other kiss we'd shared. This one was full of real emotion, real passion, real desperation, and love and need. When we finally broke apart, we were both crying, both overwhelmed by the intensity of what we felt for each other. "I love you," he said. the words coming out rough and fervent. I love you so much it terrifies me. You saved my life, my heart, my soul. You took a frozen king and made him human again. How can I ever repay that? You don't need to repay me, I said, cupping his face in my hands. You just need to live, truly live, fully feeling everything good and bad that comes. That's all I want from you. He smiled then, a real, genuine, beautiful smile that transformed his harsh features into something breathtaking. Then you shall have it, my heart. I will live more fully than any king before me, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret loving a broken man. The days that followed Darius's emotional awakening were challenging in ways neither of us had fully anticipated. He struggled with managing the constant flood of feelings, sometimes becoming overwhelmed by emotions he didn't know how to process. Anger would flare hot and fast over small annoyances. Sadness would hit him unexpectedly, leaving him quiet and withdrawn for hours. Joy, when it came, was almost manic in its intensity, making him laugh too loud and smile too wide. Through it all, I was his steady presence. I taught him techniques for emotional regulation, breathing exercises, and mindfulness practices I'd learned from my healing studies. We talked for hours about what he was feeling and why, working through 5 years of accumulated experiences that now suddenly mattered. It was exhausting for both of us, but also deeply satisfying. I was watching him become more human, more alive, more himself than he'd been in years. The castle changed with him. His temper was unpredictable now, but so was his kindness. He forgave servants for small mistakes, where before he would have punished them coldly. He smiled at people in the hallways, asked about their families, showed genuine interest in their lives. The fear that had permeated every stone began to lift, replaced slowly with something warmer. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. 2 months after the curse broke, Darius summoned his entire court to the throne room for a formal announcement. I stood to the side with the other senior staff, nervous about what he was going to say. He'd been secretive about his plans, telling me only that it was time to make things official. He stood before his throne, looking every inch the powerful Alpha King, but with a warmth in his eyes that had been absent before. My lords and ladies, he began, his voice carrying through the vast room. I stand before you today, a changed man. Many of you have noticed the differences in me over these past months. Some of you know the full story, others only pieces. It is time you knew the truth. He proceeded to tell them everything. About the curse, about how it was laid and why, about his 5 years of frozen emotions and cruel rule. He apologized, his voice thick with genuine regret, for the fear he'd spread, for the harshness of his reign, for forgetting that he ruled people, not just territory. Some in the crowd wept openly, others looked stunned. But everyone listened with rapt attention. The curse was broken, he continued, not by magic or power or force, but by the gentle persistence of one person. A woman who was brought to this castle as a prisoner, who had every reason to hate me but who instead chose compassion, who saw a broken man beneath the frozen king and refused to give up on him. His eyes found mine across the room. Mira Ashbourne, would you please come here? My heart was racing as I made my way through the parting crowd to stand before him. He took my hand, his grip warm and firm, and looked down at me with such love that my breath caught. Mira has been my healer, my advisor, my anchor through the storm of my transformation, he said, his voice softer now but still carrying. She has saved my life in more ways than one, and I would like her to be more than just my head healer. He turned fully toward me, and I saw him drop to one knee, saw the shock ripple through the assembled court. Mira Ashbourne, you have my heart, broken and remade as it is. You have my respect, my gratitude, and my deepest love. Would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my queen? The throne room erupted in gasps and whispers, but I barely heard them. All I could see was Darius, kneeling before me with vulnerability and hope written across his face, offering me not just his heart, but his entire future. I thought about everything that had brought us to this moment, all the pain and growth and impossible circumstances that had forged something beautiful between us. I thought about the girl I'd been, gathering herbs alone in the forest, and the woman I'd become, strong and purposeful and deeply in love. Yes, I said, my voice clear and certain. Yes, I will marry you. He stood and swept me into his arms, kissing me soundly while the court erupted in cheers behind us. When he set me down, I saw tears on his cheeks, happy tears that he didn't bother to hide. You've made me the happiest man alive, he murmured against my hair. I will spend every day proving myself worthy of you. The wedding was held 6 weeks later, a grand affair that drew nobles from across the kingdom and beyond. I wore a gown of white and silver, crowned with winter roses, and walked down an aisle lined with people who had once feared their king and now celebrated his transformation. Darius waited for me at the altar in formal black, his eyes bright with emotion, and when I reached him and took his hands, I felt the rightness of it settle into my bones. The ceremony was traditional, overseen by the kingdom's high priest, but Darius had insisted on adding personal vows. When it came time, he looked into my eyes and spoke from the heart. Mira, you came into my life when I was lost in eternal winter. You brought spring back to my frozen heart, not with force or demands, but with gentle, persistent care. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. You loved me when I could not love you back. Every beat of my restored heart belongs to you. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to protect you, and to spend every remaining day of my life earning the gift you've given me. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke my own vows. Darius, you gave me purpose when I had none, strength when I felt weak, and a place to belong when I thought I'd always be alone. You showed me that even the coldest winter can give way to warmth, that even the most broken heart can heal. I promise to stand beside you through every season, to be your anchor in storms and your companion in calm. I promise to love you not despite your past, but because of everything it taught us both. My heart is yours, now and always. We sealed our vows with a kiss that felt like a promise, like hope made solid, like the future opening before us bright and warm. The court cheered, and Darius swept me into his arms, carrying me down the aisle like I weighed nothing, his laughter ringing out clear and joyous. The feast that followed lasted well into the night. Darius barely left my side, always touching me somehow, his hand in mine or his arm around my waist, as if afraid I might disappear if he let go. We danced together, and he was clumsy at it, never having learned properly during his frozen years, but his eyes never left mine, and his smile never faded. Lord Adrian Thornwood approached to offer congratulations, his manner respectful and friendly, with no sign of the humiliation he'd suffered months before. Darius thanked him graciously and apologized for his behavior that night, explaining about the curses breaking. Adrian laughed and said all was forgiven, especially since it had led to this happy ending. As midnight approached, Darius led me from the great hall to his chambers, our chambers now, and closed the door on the celebrating crowd. The rooms had been transformed, filled with candles and flowers, the bed covered in rose petals. It was romantic in a way that made my heart swell. I wanted tonight to be perfect for you, he said softly, pulling me close. You deserve everything beautiful this world can offer. It's already perfect, I assured him, because I'm with you. We made love that night with the tenderness of new lovers discovering each other, with the passion of two people who had fought hard for their happiness, with the deep connection of souls that recognized each other as home. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms, I felt more content than I ever had in my life. The journey from prisoner to queen, from captor to lover, had been long and strange and difficult, but lying there in the darkness with Darius's steady heartbeat under my ear, I knew it had all been worth it. The years that followed were not without challenges. Darius continued to work on managing his emotions, occasionally struggling with intensity or control. There were days when old patterns of coldness would surface, when he'd shut down under stress or retreat into distance. But we worked through it together, with patience and communication and love. Slowly, he became more balanced, learning to feel fully without being overwhelmed, to express his emotions in healthy ways, to be both a strong king and a vulnerable human. I continued my work as head healer, now with the additional responsibility of being queen. I established hospitals in every major city, trained new healers using the techniques I'd developed, and made healthcare accessible to even the poorest citizens. Darius supported every initiative, funding my projects generously and using his authority to ensure cooperation from sometimes reluctant nobles. Together, we transformed the kingdom. The eternal snow around the castle melted completely, gardens blooming in places that had been frozen for 5 years. The people who had lived in fear learned to trust their king again, seeing in him both strength and compassion. Laws were rewritten to be more just, systems reformed to be more fair, and the kingdom prospered under our combined rule. On our 2nd anniversary, Darius took me back to the throne room where we'd first met, where I'd knelt before him as a terrified prisoner. "Look at us now," he said, pulling me close. "Who could have imagined that this is where we'd end up?" "I knew," I said teasingly. "From the moment you looked at me with those ice blue eyes, I knew you were going to be important to me. I just didn't know how." He laughed, that warm, genuine sound I never tired of hearing. "Liar. You thought I was a monster. I thought you were a monster who might be worth saving," I corrected. Turns out I was right. He kissed me there in the throne room, surrounded by the tapestries and torches and memories, and I felt the rightness of our story settling over us like a blessing. We had been prisoner and captor, patient and healer, breaker and broken. Now we were simply Darius and Mira, king and queen, partners in every way that mattered. When our first child was born, a daughter with my dark hair and his ice blue eyes, Darius held her with shaking hands and cried openly at the miracle of it. "I can feel joy," he whispered in wonder, staring down at her tiny face. "Real, pure, overwhelming joy. Thank you, Mira. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." 2 years later came a son, and then another daughter after that. Our family grew, and with it, the warmth in the castle deepened. The halls that had once echoed with fear now rang with children's laughter. The king who had been frozen now played with his children in the courtyards, taught them to ride and read and rule with both strength and kindness. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the castle was settling for the night, Darius and I would sit together in his study, our study, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes he would tell me about the darkness of his cursed years, the emptiness that had consumed him. And I would hold his hand and remind him that those days were past. Sometimes I would share memories of my lonely life before the castle, and he would pull me close and promise that I would never be alone again. Years turned into decades. Our children grew and had children of their own. Darius's hair went fully silver, lines deepening around his eyes from years of genuine smiles. I aged too, my own face showing the marks of time and life well lived, but our love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, richer with every passing year. On our 50th wedding anniversary, the kingdom threw a celebration that lasted a week. Nobles and common folk alike came to Winterhold to honor the king and queen who had transformed not just their realm but each other. There were speeches and gifts and performances. But my favorite moment came at the very end, when Darius and I stood on the balcony overlooking the city, waving to the cheering crowds below. "Do you remember when I captured you?" he asked quietly, his arm around my waist. "When you were just a frightened Omega who stumbled into my frozen world?" "I remember everything," I said, leaning into his warmth. "Every moment, good and bad, that brought us here. I captured you thinking you were nothing, a prisoner of no importance." He turned to face me fully, cupping my face in his weathered hands. "But you captured me right back, without chains or dungeons or force. You captured my heart, my soul, my entire being. And I have been your willing prisoner ever since." "Then we're both captives," I said, smiling up at him, "happily bound to each other for whatever time we have left." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 50 years of love and devotion and gratitude. The crowd below erupted in cheers, but I barely heard them. All that mattered was this moment, this man, this life we had built together from the ashes of curses and captivity. That night, as we lay together in the darkness of our chambers, Darius whispered against my hair, "You know, I used to think the curse was the worst thing that ever happened to me, that losing my ability to feel was the ultimate punishment. And now, I asked softly, now I understand it was a gift in disguise, because it brought you to me. If I hadn't been cursed, if I hadn't been that frozen king who needed saving, you never would have entered my life. We never would have found this love. So perhaps the gods knew what they were doing after all. I smiled in the darkness, my hand finding his and lacing our fingers together. Perhaps they did. Or perhaps we simply made the best of what they gave us. Either way, I wouldn't change a single moment of our story. Neither would I, he murmured, his voice growing drowsy. Not the pain, not the fear, not the years of ice. Because it all led here, to you, to us, to this life we've built. You are my thaw, my spring, my everything. As his breathing deepened into sleep, I lay awake a little longer, thinking about the impossible journey that had brought us together. From prisoner to queen, from frozen king to loving husband, from two broken people to one unshakable whole. Our story hadn't been easy, but it had been ours, written in choices and chances, and the stubborn belief that even the coldest heart could learn to beat again. Outside our window, snow began to fall. Gentle and beautiful, but no longer eternal. It would melt with morning's light, giving way to warmth and sun and life. Just as Darius's frozen heart had melted beneath my touch. Just as my captivity had transformed into freedom of a different kind. Just as winter always, eventually, surrendered to spring. I closed my eyes and let sleep claim me, content in the knowledge that when I woke, he would still be there. My Alpha King, my love, my home. No longer my captor, but my choice. Forever and always, until the end of our days and whatever lay beyond.